The first cries of Richard Stephen Valenzuela pierced the air on May 13, 1941, in the San Fernando Valley suburb of Pacoima, California. Born to Mexican-American parents Joseph Stephen Valenzuela and Concepcion Concha Reyes, young Richard grew up in a modest household where money was scarce, but music was abundant. His father worked as a tree surgeon and ranch hand, moving the family between California and Mexico for work, while his mother held the family together through sheer determination and love. The Valenzuela home was filled with the sounds of traditional Mexican folk songs and the rhythms that would later influence Richard's unique musical style. Richard was the second of 5 children, growing up alongside his siblings in a tight-knit family that valued their heritage and embraced the cultural richness of their Mexican roots. The neighborhood of Pacoima was a melting pot of working-class families, and young Richard navigated between two worlds: the traditional Mexican culture at home and the emerging rock and roll scene that was sweeping through American youth culture in the 1950s. His childhood was marked by the typical struggles of immigrant families trying to carve out their piece of the American dream, but it was also filled with moments of joy, particularly when music entered the picture. The divorce of his parents when Richard was still young created a fracture in the family structure, but his mother's resilience became the foundation upon which he would build his character. Concha worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads, instilling in her children the value of hard work and perseverance. Despite the financial hardships, she recognized something special in her son's passion for music and did everything she could to nurture it, even when it meant sacrificing other necessities. Richard's first encounter with music came through his uncle's guitar, an instrument that would become an extension of his very soul. He was barely 8 years old when he picked it up for the first time, his small fingers struggling to form chords on the strings. But there was something natural about the way he connected with the instrument, as if he had been born to make music. His uncle taught him the basics of traditional Mexican folk music, and young Richard would spend hours practicing, his determination evident even at that tender age. He absorbed everything: the corridos his mother sang while cooking, the mariachi music that floated through neighborhood celebrations, and the rhythm and blues that crackled through the radio waves. By the time Richard entered junior high school, his talent had become undeniable. He formed his first band, the Silhouettes, performing at local venues and school dances, his voice already showing the powerful timbre that would later captivate millions, combined with his energetic guitar playing to create something fresh and exciting. He wasn't just copying the rock and roll stars he heard on the radio. He was beginning to forge his own sound, one that blended his Mexican heritage with the new American musical revolution. His performances became local events, with teenagers packing into small venues to hear this young Mexican-American kid who sang with such passion and played guitar with a ferocity that belied his age. It was during a performance at a movie theater in San Fernando that Richard caught the attention of Bob Keane, a Los Angeles-based record producer and owner of Delphi Records. Keane was immediately struck by the young performer's raw talent, charisma, and the unique way he fused different musical styles. But Keane also recognized something that Richard's family had perhaps not fully considered: the harsh reality of the music industry in the 1950s. America was still deeply segregated, and Mexican-American performers faced significant barriers to mainstream success. Keane made a business decision that would forever change the young musician's identity. Richard Stephen Valenzuela would become Ritchie Valens. The name change was presented as a necessity for commercial success, a shortening and anglicizing that would make the young artist more palatable to mainstream American audiences. For Richard and his family, it was a bittersweet moment, pride in his opportunity mixed with the pain of having to hide part of his identity to achieve his dreams. Nevertheless, at just 16 years old, Ritchie Valens signed his first recording contract in May 1958, stepping into a whirlwind that would consume the final 8 months of his life. Ritchie's first recording session at Gold Star Studios in Los Angeles was a revelation. He arrived with a notebook full of songs, melodies that had been swirling in his head for years, finally getting their chance to be heard by the world. Among these was a song he had written for his high school sweetheart, Donna Ludwig, a simple but heartfelt ballad that captured the innocent intensity of teenage love. Donna was pure emotion distilled into music, Ritchie's voice carrying every ounce of his genuine feelings for the girl who had captured his heart. On the flip side of that single was something entirely different. La Bamba, a rock and roll reimagining of a traditional Mexican folk song from Veracruz. La Bamba was revolutionary in ways that even Ritchie might not have fully understood at the time. Here was a Mexican-American teenager taking a centuries-old folk song, sung entirely in Spanish, and transforming it into a rock and roll anthem with a driving beat and electric guitar that could make anyone want to dance. It was a bold statement of cultural pride at a time when assimilation was often seen as the only path to success. Ritchie couldn't even speak Spanish fluently. He had learned the words phonetically, but his performance was so authentic, so full of joy and energy that it transcended language barriers. When Donna was released in late 1958, it climbed the charts rapidly, eventually reaching number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song resonated with teenagers across the country who heard their own romantic yearnings in Ritchie's tender vocals. Radio stations couldn't play it enough, and suddenly this 17-year-old kid from Pacoima was a national sensation. La Bamba initially served as the B-side, but it quickly developed its own momentum, particularly in areas with large Latino populations. The song was infectious, impossible not to move to, and it showcased Ritchie's guitar prowess and vocal range in ways that Donna didn't. Ritchie's third single, Come On Let's Go, released earlier in the year, had already established him as more than a one-hit wonder. The song's upbeat tempo and Ritchie's exuberant delivery made it an instant classic, reaching the top 20 on the charts. In the span of just a few months, Ritchie Valens had gone from playing high school dances to appearing on American Bandstand, the premier music television show of the era. Dick Clark introduced him to millions of viewers, and Ritchie, dressed sharply and wearing his trademark smile, performed with a confidence that masked his nervousness. He was living a dream that most people twice his age never achieved. The success was intoxicating but also overwhelming. Ritchie was still just a teenager, thrust into a world of recording sessions, promotional appearances, and constant travel. His mother worried about him, this boy who had so recently been sitting at her kitchen table, now surrounded by industry executives and screaming fans. But Ritchie handled it with remarkable grace, never letting fame change the kind, humble person he had always been. He sent money home to his family, took care of his siblings, and remained devoted to Donna, even as other girls threw themselves at him wherever he performed. By late 1958, Ritchie was recording his debut album, simply titled Ritchie Valens. The album showcased his versatility, including rock and roll numbers Bulat Su ballads, Waitidu, and his innovative fusion of Mexican and American musical styles. Songs like That's My Little Susie, In a Turkish Town, and We Belong Together demonstrated that Ritchie was not just a singles artist, but a musician with depth and range. His guitar work was particularly impressive, showing influences from blues legends like T-Bone Walker, while maintaining his own distinctive style. In December 1958, Ritchie appeared in the film Go Johnny Go, a rock and roll musical featuring several popular artists of the day. His performance of Ooh My Head showcased his stage presence and helped introduce him to an even wider audience. The film career that could have been was just beginning to take shape when he received an invitation that would seal his fate. The Winter Dance Party Tour was conceived as a multi-week bus tour through the Midwest in January and February 1959. The lineup was impressive. Buddy Holly, one of rock and roll's biggest stars, the Big Bopper, J.P. Richardson, riding high with his novelty hit Chantilly Lace, and Dion and the Belmonts, known for their smooth harmonies. Ritchie Valens was added to the bill, the youngest performer on the tour, but certainly not the least popular. It should have been a triumphant tour, a celebration of rock and roll's rising stars, entertaining audiences across the frozen heartland of America. Instead, the Winter Dance Party Tour became infamous for being one of the most grueling and miserable experiences in rock and roll history. The tour bus, which was supposed to be heated, kept breaking down, leaving the performers and band members shivering in sub-zero temperatures as they traveled between venues. Several members of the touring party developed frostbite and illness. The heaters didn't work properly, the seats were uncomfortable, and the distances between shows were enormous. They performed nearly every night, sometimes doing 2 shows, barely sleeping, living on fast food and coffee. Buddy Holly, who had creative and financial disputes with his manager, was particularly frustrated by the conditions. He had planned the tour partly to raise money, but found himself losing money due to the poor logistics and the failing bus. After a performance in Clear Lake, Iowa on February 2, 1959, Holly made a decision that would alter music history forever. He arranged to charter a small plane to fly him and his band members to the next tour stop in Moorhead, Minnesota, allowing them to arrive early, rest, do laundry, and escape the cursed bus, even if just for one leg of the journey. The Beechcraft Bonanza, a single-engine plane, could only hold 3 passengers plus the pilot. Holly immediately took one seat. His bass player, Waylon Jennings, was supposed to take another. But the Big Bopper, suffering from flu and desperately needing rest, asked Jennings if he could have his seat. Jennings, in an act of kindness that would haunt him for the rest of his life, agreed. The third seat belonged to Holly's guitarist, Tommy Alsup. Ritchie Valens desperately wanted to fly too. At 17 years old, he had never been on a plane before, and the idea excited him despite his fear of flying, a fear he had developed after witnessing a tragic plane crash at his junior high school years earlier. 2 planes had collided over his school's playground, killing several people, including some students. The trauma of that day had left Ritchie with a deep anxiety about flying, yet now, exhausted and freezing from the endless bus rides, the promise of warmth and rest outweighed his fear. Ritchie approached Tommy Alsup and asked if he could have the seat. Alsup was reluctant. He too was tired and wanted to fly. Ritchie persisted, and finally someone suggested they flip a coin to decide. In the small dressing room at the Surf Ballroom, with other tour members watching, a coin was tossed into the air. Ritchie called it, and when the coin landed, fate had made its decision. Ritchie Valens would take the third seat on the plane. Tommy Alsup would stay behind on the bus, a decision that would save his life and burden him with survivor's guilt for decades. The pilot, Roger Peterson, was a young man with only a few years of flying experience and little instrument training. The weather forecast for the night was concerning: snow, poor visibility, and strong winds. But Peterson believed he could make the flight. At approximately 12:55 a.m. on February 3, 1959, the Beechcraft Bonanza, carrying Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, the Big Bopper, and pilot Roger Peterson, took off from Mason City Municipal Airport into a dark, snow-filled sky. The plane never made it to Moorhead. Shortly after takeoff, as the aircraft climbed into the winter storm, something went wrong. Peterson, likely disoriented by the lack of visual references in the dark and snow, and unfamiliar with the plane's instruments, lost control of the aircraft. The plane went into a dive and crashed into a frozen cornfield just 8 miles from the airport. The impact was devastating. All 4 occupants were killed instantly. Buddy Holly was 22 years old. The Big Bopper was 28. Ritchie Valens was just 17, only 8 months into a career that had promised to change music forever. The wreckage wasn't discovered until the morning of February 3rd, when the plane failed to arrive in Moorhead and a search was initiated. The sight that greeted searchers was horrific. The plane had hit the ground at high speed, scattering debris across the snow-covered field. The bodies were found still in their seats, the violence of the crash having taken them before they even knew what was happening. News of the tragedy spread rapidly, shocking the nation and the world. 3 of rock and roll's brightest stars gone in an instant. For Ritchie's mother, Concha, the news was incomprehensible. Just days earlier, her son had called her from the road, excited about his success, promising to come home soon. She had worried about him on that dangerous tour, had sensed something wasn't right, but she had trusted that God would protect him. Now he was gone. Her beautiful boy, who had brought music and joy to everyone he met, dead in a frozen field thousands of miles from home. The coin flip that had sealed his fate seemed like the cruelest twist of destiny. Donna Ludwig, Ritchie's girlfriend and the inspiration for his biggest hit, was left to mourn the boy she had loved, forever immortalized in a song that would now carry an unbearable sadness. The song that had celebrated their young love became a painful reminder of everything that had been lost. She would go on to live a full life, eventually marrying and having children. But she never forgot Ritchie, the first boy who had loved her so completely that he had written her into history. The impact of the crash on the music world was profound. Radio DJ Alan Freed, speaking on the air about the tragedy, remarked that it was the day the Pachobati music died, a phrase that would be immortalized 13 years later in Don McLean's song American Pie. The loss of Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Ritchie Valens in a single night seemed to mark the end of rock and roll's innocent early era, a brutal reminder of mortality that shadowed the genre for years to come. Ritchie Valens was buried at San Fernando Mission Cemetery in Los Angeles, his funeral attended by hundreds of mourners who had been touched by his music and his spirit. His family, devastated by the loss, struggled to comprehend how someone so young, with so much promise, could be taken so suddenly. His mother would spend the rest of her life honoring his memory, protecting his legacy, and ensuring that the world never forgot her son. In the years following his death, Ritchie's influence only grew. La Bamba became recognized as a groundbreaking recording that paved the way for Latino artists in rock and roll, proving that music sung in Spanish could cross over to mainstream audiences. The song has been covered countless times by artists around the world, but none have captured the pure joy and energy of Ritchie's original version. His brief recording career, lasting less than a year, produced a body of work that remained relevant and influential for generations. In 1987, nearly 3 decades after his death, a biographical film titled La Bamba brought Ritchie's story to a new generation. The film, starring Lou Diamond Phillips as Ritchie, was a critical and commercial success, introducing millions of people to the brief but brilliant life of the young musician. The soundtrack, featuring Los Lobos' cover of La Bamba, became a massive hit, topping charts worldwide and reminding everyone of Ritchie's enduring legacy. Ritchie Valens was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2001, an honor that recognized his pioneering role in music history. Despite a recording career that lasted only 8 months and produced fewer than 20 songs, his impact was undeniable. He had broken barriers, proven that Latino artists could succeed in rock and roll, and created music that transcended cultural and linguistic boundaries. He had shown that authenticity and passion mattered more than conforming to industry expectations. The tragedy of Ritchie Valens is not just in the life that was cut short, but in all the music that was never made. What would he have recorded next? How would his sound have evolved? Would he have continued to bridge cultures through music, bringing more Spanish-language songs to American audiences? Would he have become a cultural icon, a voice for Mexican Americans in the entertainment industry? These questions can never be answered, making his loss all the more poignant. Yet in another sense, Ritchie Valens achieved a kind of immortality. His music never aged, never became dated or irrelevant. La Bamba still makes people want to dance. Donna still captures the sweet ache of young love. His smile in D&D photographs still radiates warmth and joy. He remains forever 17, forever on the cusp of greatness, forever the talented kid from Pacoima who dared to dream big and worked hard enough to make those dreams come true, even if only briefly. The small plane that took off into the snowy Iowa night carried with it not just 4 lives, but infinite possibilities. When it crashed into that frozen cornfield, it didn't just end those lives, it created a permanent what-if in music history. But perhaps that's not the right way to remember Ritchie Valens. Perhaps instead of mourning what could have been, we should celebrate what was. A teenager who, in 8 short months, created music that has lasted more than 6 decades, who represented his culture with pride, who remained humble and kind despite fame, and who left the world a little bit brighter than he found it. The day the music died wasn't really the day the music died at all. Ritchie Valens' music lives on, played at weddings and parties, covered by new artists, introduced to new generations. Every time someone picks up a guitar and tries to play La Bamba, every time a teenager writes a song for their first love, every time a young Latino musician pursues their dreams in rock and roll, Ritchie Valens is there. His life was tragically short, but his influence was immeasurably long. That's the real legacy of the teen idol who never came back. He never really left.